Let's do this. Sweet. Okay. Someone should ask about the game's relation to other conjoined player character games like Banjo Kazooie. I don't have a lot more to say about that, except Banjo Kazooie is an excellent example of what I think of as the sort of Navi design pattern, which you also see in like Halo with Cortana, and I mean innumerable games. The difference with Banjo Kazooie is that Banjo and Kazooie, I mean, they're not both playable characters, but they're both characters that add something mechanically to the game. And so if you think about that as a spectrum, right, of the many games that include a companion character who is primarily there to act as to help characterize the main character, which actually Kazooie doesn't really do that much. I mean, because they don't have dialogue, do they? I don't think they do. But in games that have that sort of like fundamental pairing of protagonist characters, to what extent is the companion character passive versus active narratively versus active mechanically, right? And so in I'm thinking about like Ocarina of Time, Navi is pretty passive. I mean, I guess they rope her into the idea of like targeting, right? That's and that kind of thing. But Cortana is also generally passive. I think in some of the later Halo games, she becomes narratively active. But Kazooie in BanjoKazooie is mechanically active, and this game I think it sits somewhere in between, right? Pablo, there are mechanics that revolve around Pablo, but they are like tertiary mechanics. Mostly he's there as a dialogue foil. That's my interpretation. Conjoined player character games. I like that term. That's interesting. I think I like that term. Since there aren't many buttons to use here, do you think this game would make a really good arcade machine? Because that's really the vibe I get for it. Yeah, and there was somebody else, I think, in the chat earlier who asked something along the same lines. I do. That's also the vibe that I get from it. I mean, there's a practicality to that, in that arcade machines aren't commercially viable anymore, right? They only exist as nostalgia products and promotional products. It is difficult to... Well, that's not entirely true. There are a couple of arcades that still exist and still produce new machines. Like Dave & Buster's is a good example. There's new games that come, new hardware that comes out for that. And I think that this game is... I mean, it's not as bad as I was honestly expecting it to be, but I don't know that it's family friendly enough for something like that. It's also fundamentally designed wrong for that atmosphere. I mean, it's something that you could fairly quickly like put it together. You could rework it, but right now the length of the missions, the way that they're scored, the way that they chain together, doesn't really work super well for an arcade environment, and the 15-minute opening cutscene doesn't work at all. and even a lot of the intercalary cutscenes or just like dialogues that are happening aren't great for that environment. You could cut a lot of that stuff out. You could cut down the missions. You could make them like more arcade driven, and it would work. Like I can see it pretty well. But the game as produced, you couldn't just slap it into an arcade machine, into a cabinet, and expect it to work super well as it is. I mean, there is an ideal case where you could just create for no capital an arcade cabinet that was decorated appropriately and put in the appropriate environment and played this game. And I guess that is actually a pretty good argument for virtual reality. I hate to admit that. That is one of the only things that I can see being interesting in virtual reality this is consistent with my take on virtual reality. The only things that I'm interested in virtual reality are things that play with the context in which we play games. So there's a great horror demo that I don't remember the name of that involved the VR game was you are sitting on a couch playing a game on your TV, and it's a horror game, and as you play the game can like play with shit like your lights going out, and just environment in your living room becomes a part of the game because you're actually in VR. It's all, virtual. In the same way that I could see that like putting on a VR helmet and walking up to an arcade cabinet that was spectacularly designed for LocoCycle would be interesting. Like that'd be fun. At least until you got an enormous headache. But it is, regardless, I think that the vibe that you're getting out of this is not necessarily that this game was designed for an arcade machine, but this game is designed around an Americana aesthetic, like a Americana cartoonified and jacked up to 11. And the arcade machine, the arcade, right? The video arcade is a core part of that sort of Americana culture that this game is tapping into. And I think that's part of why it seems like it would fit so well at an arcade, is because it would. It's kind of a game that's not specifically about arcades, but it is about the same culture that arcades are about. Off-topic question: would you please shed some light on why you don't think The Longest Journey is a good candidate for Mostly Walking? So, all right, here's my thing with The Longest Journey, and I'm not like, I don't make decisions about Mostly Walking, but I have said in the past that I don't think Longest Journey is a great Mostly Walking candidate. The reason that I have that opinion is that I haven't played all the way through through Longest Journey. I feel like I'm going to do that several times because Longest Journey and Mostly Walking are conceptually the same phrase. Longest Journey, the first couple hours of it, like my impression of it based on playing a couple hours of it, is that it is intensely dialogue heavy. We play games that have dialogue, certainly, but and I actually don't really know how that plays from the audience's perspective, but I can tell you that from our perspective, playing the games, dialogue, and especially long blocks of dialogue, kills our energy and makes it very difficult to keep up a basic level of performance, right? Which is what this is. Regardless of how how much fun we're having, how casually we take it, how honest we are with the camera. This is fundamentally performative and requires a certain amount of energy. And dialogue in games, especially in adventure games, especially sort of the way that it is presented in games like The Longest Journey, is contemplative. It's novelistic. It's a lot like sort of not just world building, but there's a lot of pace building in it. Like it sets the pace for a game, and a game with that level, that amount of dialogue. First of all, it makes us uncomfortable because there are long periods where we can't really do anything, and sometimes we want to talk, but we feel like we can't talk over the dialogue, and sometimes we try to talk over the dialogue and it goes badly, and sometimes we just sit there silently, and that feels really weird on our end. I don't know how it plays for the audience, but it sort of like kills the casual vibe that we're going for. This is not, frankly, none of this is about how Longest Journey may or may not be appropriate to stream. It's about how I don't feel like The Longest Journey is appropriate to play in a social setting, or at least the social setting that the three of us have. The Longest Journey is just not a game that I would bring over to Day 9's house and play with him and Bill. Whereas like the King's Quest games or Toonstruck, absolutely. They have a different pace, they have a different energy, we have a different interaction with them. And so it's hard to say for sure, but I feel like The Longest Journey would play like Siberia. It's a better game than Siberia, but in some ways I think it would be a worse experience playing in that setting. Longest Journey is a game that has been recommended to me a number of times, and I really should play myself, and I think I would enjoy in the right setting, but that socially with Sean and Bill is not the right setting. Are you free Thursday or Friday night? Because I want to go to Medieval Times. Maybe Friday. I might be free on Friday. I'll text you. Do you think you guys will ever play Discworld on Mostly Walking? It hasn't actually come up. But it's definitely like it's on my list of possibilities. I played like 5 minutes. I played I think, oh god, the fucking nostalgia. So I am pretty sure that in the late 90s I received PC Gamer magazine, which came with a demo disc every month. And Discworld may have been on one of the demo CDs, like a CD-ROM that you put in, and it had demos of games on it. And I played a bunch of games for 15 minutes that way, and I don't know if that's where I played Discworld, but that's what I'm associating with it, because I only played it for like 15 minutes. But that seems like a great candidate to me. I don't know if that's a good game at all, but I think it'd be fun. I think this game would be better as an old school arcade machine. Oh, Bluebird, you asked that twice. Yeah, so it's a tough question. I think that if it was designed slightly differently, it would work really well in that setting. It depends on what you mean by better. I think that it would be even less commercially successful. I think that, maybe there is a design ideal around that. Like this game played in that environment hits some kind of like incredible high note. But I don't know. It's hard to say. Like that culture doesn't really exist anymore. And I don't think that this game could survive as an arcade game. I think that part of what its charm is that it brings that aesthetic into your living room. Advice for grad school in general. For grad school for games or for just grad school in general? I mean, it's tough. I guess be cognizant of what you are trying to get out of going to grad school, and make sure that the cost aligns with that. For me, I was fortunate to be in a position where what I really wanted to get out of grad school was 3 years of working with the people who I knew would be here. And I was able to afford that. Grad school, the sort of economic value of grad school varies radically depending on the field that you're going into. The value of that master's degree is just very different. So you're not keep that in mind, I guess. What is the value of that degree? That said, the degree itself is part of the value proposition. The education, obviously, is part of the value proposition. So if you're going to school to learn specific skills that then are marketable, that's worth factoring into it. And then the connections that you will make, depending on the school that you go to, are a huge part of that. And that is something that I didn't really comprehend before I came to grad school. I knew that like I wanted to work with these people. I wanted to be in close proximity to them. But I didn't know how to network, and I didn't know what networking meant. And I didn't sort of know that I would make these connections that then would become career connections. So again, depending on your field, that can be incredible, and your school, that can be incredibly valuable. In terms of preparing yourself for it, I mean, study for the standardized exams. What's the GRE? No, not GRE. Not GRE. It is a 3-letter acronym, though. I can't think of it. I don't know. I took it. Study for it. Like, obviously, there's that stuff. Put together a good application. Like, take your time. Have people review it. You're going to be writing, like, personal statements, just like you did when you applied to undergrad. I mean, it is the GRE. Oh, yes. Not to be confused with GED. That's what I was doing. GRE. Like, all of that basic stuff that you already know from going through undergrad, and application to undergrad, that's all the same. But now you have a very different skill set, and you probably have some kind of a portfolio, and you have some kind of a resume, like you probably didn't when you were applying to undergrad. And so you will need to sort of relearn how to present yourself now that you have some real qualifications. Okay, couple more questions. If one of the characters in this game was actually a dragon, which do you think it would be? That's kind of a tough question. I mean, like, thinking about dragon, we've come up with, I think, a couple of paradigms for dragons. One of them is the breaker of rules, right? Dragons are the beast that that defies the logic of the world in which it exists. It wields a power. It is awesome because there should be nothing like it. The Great Worm, right? And in that sense, I think either Iris or Spike is a candidate for that. And that's unusual. I mean, Spike would be the obvious one. Spike is the enemy that is unlike any other enemy, right? Spike is the enemy that is at least your equal in some ways, whereas everything else is sort of fodder for your road trip of destruction, of mayhem. Spike sort of is somebody that you converse with, who doesn't just get blown away, and who can, to some extent, keep up with you and keeps returning, right? Unlike anybody else that we see in the game. At least that's sort of how they've set it up. But interestingly, Spike is all of those things because he's a reflection of Iris, right? He's not a terrible monster that is unimaginable. He's Iris's mirror image, and that's why he's more powerful than everybody else. And so Iris also really is sort of a candidate for a dragon, which I don't think we've played games where we've thought about the protagonist as a dragon character before. At least not a lot of them. Or at least I don't remember thinking about it in those terms. So, Iris sort of embodies that dragon character because she also breaks the rules of the world, right? She is sort of you think about this, you think about playing the dragon character in terms of disaster movies, right? If any kind of Rampage style game where you play Godzilla, you play the kaiju that is destroying the city, that's you are playing the dragon character there, and that's atypical for game protagonists, but it happens, and that's actually sort of what's happening here. Iris is the kaiju. Iris is the bringer of destruction, just sort of like creating a swath of chaos in her wake as she goes on her quixotic mission. I think that that's an interesting lens through which to view this game, is that it's a game, it's a disaster game. You are playing the disaster, which we sort of know, like that's sort of how the scene is set, right? She's crazy, she's doing these crazy things, she's asking Pablo, who is literally dragged along behind her to accompany her on this mission, and she's asking the player, who is sort of metaphorically dragged along by dint of playing the game, that she is the character that you are following. The gameplay only allows you a certain range of actions. You also have to blow up these oil tankers, which is, she is a force of destruction on the world, and as such, you, the player, sort of embody that force of destruction. I think that's really interesting, actually. If this were an M. Night Shyamalan movie, what would be the twist? Well, That's a good question. Is this an M. Night Shyamalan movie that Shyamalan directed? Because then it would probably be really good. Or one that he wrote, because then it would probably be really bad. I saw chat throwing around the idea that Pablo was knocked unconscious, and this is all in his mind. I think similarly, when Iris was hit by a bolt of electricity, she could have gone crazy, and this is all in her mind. Other interesting twists. I mean, that she gets to where's she going? Indiana. She gets to the motor show in Indiana, and inadvertently, in so doing, over the course of the game, brings all of these secret organizations out into the open, so that they can all be arrested by the proper legal authorities. I think, and then she sort of winds up, just having a great time at the America Fest. I think would be a good one. Okay, and then really good question. I'm having a really negative reaction to seeing someone dragged along the road. How does the game get you to ignore that? Two ways. Well, three ways. One is it sets it up in a campy enough manner, right? Like that whole 15-minute intro cutscene seems excessive, but it really sets a tone for what kind of a narrative this game is going to present. And I'm trying to think of a parallel that isn't like early 90s porn. Like, what's the famous one? Bad Girls from Mars? Something like that. I don't know. I think of these, like, that is that era, that genre of porn has a storyline that is designed to be sort of internally consistent and reflective of the real world, but winkingly absolutely absurd, and something that you would never actually expect to see, right? It breaks all kinds of rules about the real world, but it does so sort of knowingly, and it does so in a way that makes you feel like you're complicit to it. I don't think that that's a quality that is inherent to porn or exclusive to porn, but I think that it is something that pairs particularly well with that kind of guilty pleasure. And I think there was an era in which it was, if not standard, then pretty common. Okay, Biker Girls from Mars is a title that's being thrown out. It's that kind of thing, right? And I have to admit that I don't have a exhaustive knowledge of the topic, but that's the impression that I get. So part of it is they set this up with this cheesy intro that primes you to accept that this is a world with some, I guess actually really bad 80s sci-fi also probably has this quality. It primes you to accept a world that is somewhat reflective of our own, in which the narrative asks you to be forgiving of the things that it wants to do that don't make a lick of sense, just because that's how it wants to run. So that's one thing The second thing is it is consistently played for laughs. His dialogue, although it's a lot of like screaming, "Oh my God, I'm being dragged along behind a motorcycle," is not terrified. It is clownish. And everything about it is sort of clownish. And so it has the air less of torturously killing someone by dragging them alongside a motorcycle, and more sort of like a circus, more, I mean, literally clownish, I think. More that slapstick comedy kind of a vibe. And I think they play that pretty consistently. And then the third thing is that I literally can't process Pablo that well while I'm playing the game, because there's too much other stuff going on. Like, I'm trying to dodge cars, and I'm trying to like look out for enemies, and I'm shooting, and I'm doing other things. There's a large section of the game where Pablo is being just like dragged behind the motorcycle, where I can't watch him. He's not really part of my consciousness, because there's too much else as a player that distracts me from that. Whereas a viewer of the game has the luxury to sort of pay attention to whatever they want, and whatever calls out most to them. And I think Pablo probably calls out quite a bit to a viewer. And so I think that I'm actually less aware of that disconcerting, someone being dragged along a road thing that you are having a negative reaction to than you are. Okay, one or two more. Would this game be better on VR from Pablo's or Iris's point of view? Also, if Iris was the dragon. If Iris was literally a dragon, I mean, I don't know that the game would change that much. I think it would probably be very similar. If I was playing this game on VR from either Pablo or Iris's point of view, that would be horrific. That would be horrible. Please, nobody ever do that to me. However, if I were playing this game and somebody else was wearing a VR helmet, like a headset, that gave them Pablo's point of view while I played the game, that would be kind of amazing. So somebody please do that. Maybe it's just my perception, but I believe the earlier metadating episodes had more analytical commentary than the recent mostly walking episodes. I kind of miss that. Does your game stream on Thursday also feature analytical commentary from a game designer's perspective, or is it more about unwinding and playing a game like day off streams? It is more analytical. It is not certainly entirely, and I don't have a curriculum or I mean, a lot of it is tough because I don't know the games, right? So I have no idea what to expect or what's coming up, what is worth talking about. But I do try to do these Q&A sessions after all of them. And that is explicitly to open this up to questions so that we can discuss interesting elements within the game, mostly from a design perspective, because that's what my specialty is. And I will frequently just stop in the middle of playing the game and talk about stuff that I've noticed or I find interesting, like I did at most of those. Well, maybe not most of them, but like half maybe of the ending screens, the score screens. For me, it's definitely more of an analytical exercise, and it's fun for me because this community seems to really be into that. Mostly walking is tough. I try to bring analytical commentary into it as much as I am able to and feel is appropriate. And we do sometimes take a break from the game to talk about the game. But some of that is the pacing of mostly walking is very different than metadating. The goal of mostly walking, the sort of stated goal of mostly walking, is very different than metadating, and we've been doing it for a lot longer. And we do it more frequently, I guess, is the other thing. Like, metadating we did once a month, and it was... I don't want to say that, like, mostly walking isn't exciting. It absolutely is, and I love doing it. But metadating was something that I had never done before, me or Bill. And honestly, Sean, too. Like, Day 9 had not done... that kind of show. Like, he'd done streaming, but not a show quite like that. And so for all of us, it was new and very exciting. We had a lot of energy. We did it once a month, and we would sort of, I don't know, I felt like I could bring more to it consistently. Whereas mostly walking, there are weeks when I just don't have the energy to try to, like, dig up underlying themes from the game, and that's just there. I think there are weeks when that's just not something that we can sort of pull together. And I think the audience, I don't know if there's consensus in the audience about what they would want. I do think that I try to make sure that there is some level of that in the show, because that's what I find interesting in a lot of these games that we play. But for me, play-by-play is a chance to, like, do that a lot more. Are you going to join us at TwitchCon? I don't think so. It's not a hard no, but things are so crazy right now. And then, all right, last question that I see on here. Yeah, sorry, jet lag. I don't know. I mean, I would love to, like, hang out with you guys. That's what I would love. But I'm teaching classes 3 days a week, and there's a lot of work associated with that. And Indiecade is at the beginning of October, or like early October, and that is there's a lot going on with that. So I don't think I have the bandwidth to drive down to San Diego. Okay, and then the last question that's on here, how did you lose so much weight? I rewatched the old metadating episodes and I could hardly believe it. Thank you very much. I have gained a bunch of it back, but I am working on getting that back under control. So how did I lose it? It's 90% diet. And I started using an online tool called MyFitnessPal that tracks calories. And started, like, actually doing that and sticking to it, and I did that for about 2 years and lost about 150 pounds, and then I've gained about 60 pounds back over the last 6 to 9 months. And I'm now back on a diet regimen, and I'm going to try to lose that again, get 50 pounds down from where I am now. It's tough. It is not easy for anybody who is trying to do it or is interested in trying to do it. I mean, I know how hard it is. But it is also not impossible. For me, a lot of it is a mental switch, thinking about food differently, and being in situations where essentially at the beginning of the day, I plan out what I am going to eat that day. and I sit down and I fill it out like an RPG sheet, and I make all the numbers add up, and then I know that I can't eat anything else, and that is not always easy, but I am sort of able to take the decision making away from myself, so it's less of a question of like, should I have a donut, and more, well, I mean, I can't have a donut. Donut's not on my list, so I'm just not even going to think about it. That implies the simplicity that it is actually fairly simple, but it is extremely difficult. And getting to that place mentally is hard. Staying there is hard. I found that exercise is an ally, less because it burns calories, although that is helpful, more because it suppresses my hunger at least a little bit, and it kills time. Honestly, a lot of the 2 years during which I was losing that weight, I got very little else done, and I spent a lot of days just waiting for the day to end, so that I could have more food the next day. And so going for long walks, or exercise, or doing other kinds of activities that didn't require willpower energy from me, because that's a limited resource, and you're using a lot of it on sort of what you're eating or not eating. Finding distractions that would sort of get me through the day was really useful. And then some of it is practice. So, 2 years is a long time. But even though I have slipped considerably in the last 6 months, I am much better off now than I was 3 years ago, because I have learned mental techniques. I've learned sort of self-confidence. I've learned actual techniques for counting calories. And I am much more capable of skipping unnecessary meals, or eating light when that's sort of how the nutrition works out. In the 3 years ago, that was something that I could hardly do. I sort of couldn't get through that, and now it's much easier. Yeah. Okay. That got surprisingly serious. This is play-by-play. This is sort of an odd time, because obviously this is regularly mostly walking. But thank you for everybody who joined and who stuck around through the Q&A. Really appreciate that. I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I do. I really appreciate the community that has grown up around this show and has stuck with me over the last few months, while I couldn't sort of get it together to keep doing this. But I plan to be here again on Thursday, and hopefully do this every week for a while. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Have a great few days, and hope to see you again on Thursday.